You have no idea who you're dealing with." The words hung in the humid afternoon air like a challenge, spoken with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down far worse than a badge and an attitude. Dr. Marcus Webb stood perfectly still beside his silver BMW, his long braids catching the harsh noon sun as Officer Dale Morrison circled him like a predator sizing up prey. But this was no ordinary traffic stop. And Dr. Webb was no ordinary target. 3 hours earlier, the emergency room at St. Catherine's Medical Center buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Dr. Marcus Webb moved through the controlled mayhem with practiced grace, his white coat pristine, despite having just completed a 6-hour surgery on a car accident victim. His braids, meticulously maintained and reaching just past his shoulders, were pulled back in a professional ponytail that had become his signature look among staff and patients alike. "Dr. Webb, we need you in trauma too," called Nurse Patricia Rodriguez, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of monitors and conversations. Marcus glanced at his watch, 11:47 a.m. He had promised his daughter Zoe he'd make it to her science fair presentation at 2 p.m. It would be tight, but he had never missed one of her events, and he wasn't about to start now. "What's the situation?" he asked, already moving toward the trauma bay. 18-year-old male, motorcycle versus semi-truck. Multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with cases like this. This was why he had endured 4 years of medical school, 5 years of residency, and 3 years of fellowship training in emergency medicine. This was why he had chosen to stay in the city where he grew up, despite lucrative offers from hospitals and wealthier suburbs. The next hour and 15 minutes blurred together in a symphony of medical precision. Marcus worked alongside his team, his hands steady as he stabilized the young man's condition and prepared him for emergency surgery. By the time they wheeled the patient to the OR, Marcus was confident the teenager would make a full recovery. "Another save, Dr. Webb," said Dr. Sarah Chun, the attending physician who had been observing the case. "That kid's lucky you were here." Marcus nodded, already mentally shifting gears. He had exactly 45 minutes to get across town to Zoe's school. In normal traffic, it was a 20-minute drive, but lunch hour in the city was never normal. He grabbed his keys from his locker, said quick goodbyes to his colleagues, and headed for the parking garage. His BMW 540i gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a car he had saved 3 years to buy, a small symbol of how far he had come from the housing projects where he had grown up. As he pulled out of the hospital parking garage, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The morning had been successful on all fronts. He had saved a life, mentored 2 medical students, and still had time to make it to Zoe's presentation. These were the days that made all the sleepless nights and endless studying worth it. The drive started smoothly. Traffic was lighter than expected, and Marcus found himself making good time on the main arterial roads leading toward the suburban school district where Zoe attended. He kept his speed exactly at the limit, his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Habits ingrained from years of driving while Black in America. It was at the intersection of Meridian Avenue and Oak Street that everything changed. The light had just turned green when Marcus proceeded through the intersection. He was in the right lane, signaling for an upcoming turn, when he noticed the white police cruiser in his rearview mirror. The officer seemed to be following unusually close, and Marcus felt the familiar knot form in his stomach, a sensation every Black man in America knew intimately. That he maintained his speed, checked his mirrors, and continued driving. But when the cruiser's lights suddenly flashed to life, Marcus felt his heart rate spike despite having done nothing wrong. Officer Dale Morrison had been having a particularly frustrating morning. 2 domestic disturbance calls that went nowhere, a fender bender, where both drivers blamed each other, and a dressing down from his sergeant about his recent complaint rate. At 34, Morrison felt like his career was stagnating while younger officers with college degrees got promoted around him. When he spotted the BMW with tinted windows driving through his sector, something about it irritated him. Maybe it was the way the driver seemed too comfortable, too confident. Maybe it was the expensive car in a neighborhood where Morrison figured most people couldn't afford such luxury. Or maybe it was just another bad day in a string of bad days that made him want to exert some control. That he ran the plates clean. No violations, no warrants. But Morrison had developed what he called instincts over his 12 years on the force, and something about this car told him there was more to find. When the BMW proceeded through the intersection, Morrison thought. He saw an opportunity. Had the driver really come to a complete stop at the stop sign 3 blocks back? Morrison wasn't entirely sure, but reasonable suspicion was a flexible concept, and he needed to make something happen today. The traffic stop began like thousands of others. Flashing lights, a car pulling over, two people about to have an interaction that neither truly wanted. But as Morrison approached the driver's side window, noting the black man with braids behind the wheel, he felt the familiar surge of authority that came with the badge and the gun. License and registration, Morrison said, his tone already more aggressive than the situation warranted. Dr. Webb rolled down his window completely, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen, and spoke in the calm, measured tone he had learned from his father's lectures about police encounters. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" Something about the man's composure irritated Morrison. Too smooth, too educated sounding. Morrison's jaw tightened as he repeated his demand. "License and registration." "Now." "Of course," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm going to reach into my wallet in my back pocket for my license, and then into the glove compartment for my registration. I'm just letting you know my movements." Morrison watched as the doctor moved slowly and deliberately, producing a wallet. That probably cost more than Morrison made in a week. The license identified the driver as Dr. Marcus Webb, age 36, address in Riverside Heights, one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. "Doctor, huh?" Morrison said, his tone carrying an edge of skepticism. "What kind of doctor?" "Emergency medicine," Marcus replied, glancing at his watch. "I'm actually on my way to my daughter's school presentation. Is there a specific violation you observed?" Morrison felt his irritation spike. The calm confidence, the expensive car, the polite but firm questioning of his authority, it all rubbed him the wrong way. In his mind, he was the one asking questions here. "Step out of the vehicle," Morrison ordered, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained steady. "Officer, I'd like to know what violation I'm being accused of. I have a right to that information." "You have a right to do what I tell you to do," Morrison snapped, his voice rising. "Now step out of the car before this gets complicated." It was then that Dr. Marcus Webb made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Instead of immediately complying, instead of accepting another humiliation in a lifetime full of them, he looked directly into Officer Morrison's eyes and spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had spent his career making life and death decisions. "Officer, I'm going to need you to either cite the specific violation that prompted this stop, or I'm going to exercise my right to leave. I'm a doctor. I'm on my way to my daughter's school, and I've done nothing wrong." Morrison's face flushed red. In 12 years of police work, he had never had someone, especially someone who looked like this doctor, challenge his authority so directly. Without thinking, he placed his hand on his weapon and leaned closer to the car window. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Morrison said, his voice low and threatening. Dr. Webb looked up at the officer, and for the first time since the stop began, he smiled, not with fear or submission, but with the confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was dealing with, and more importantly, who he was himself. "Actually, officer," Marcus said quietly, "I think you're the one who has no idea." The standoff lasted exactly 17 seconds. 17 seconds that would define the rest of Officer Dale Morrison's career and cement Dr. Marcus Webb's reputation. As the man who refused to be intimidated, Marcus reached slowly into his shirt pocket, never breaking eye contact with Morrison. "Officer, I'm going to show you something that might change your perspective on this situation." Morrison's grip tightened on his weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "They are visible," Marcus replied calmly, producing a small leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal a badge, not a medical ID, but an official shield that made Morrison's blood run cold. "Dr. Marcus Webb, Consultant, Internal Affairs Division," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new weight. "Badge number 7429. I've been investigating complaints of racial profiling and excessive force in this precinct for the past 6 months." Morrison felt his world tilt on its axis. Internal Affairs. The words every cop dreaded most. That's That's not possible, Morrison stammered. But even as he said it, he was remembering the rumors that had circulated through the department. Whispers about an outside consultant, someone with medical expertise who was reviewing use of force incidents and discriminatory practices. Marcus calmly reached for his phone, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. I'm going to call my supervisor. Now, Detective Captain Sarah Martinez, IA Division. She's been expecting my report on this precinct's traffic stop procedures. Wait, Morrison said, panic creeping into his voice. Look, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Marcus replied, already dialing. You pulled me over without probable cause, refused to identify the violation, and threatened me with your weapon when I exercised my constitutional rights. This is exactly the kind of behavior that prompted this investigation. As the phone connected, Marcus put it on speaker. A crisp, professional voice answered immediately. Captain Martinez. Sarah, it's Marcus. I'm currently at the intersection of Meridian and Oak with Officer. Marcus glanced at Morrison's nameplate. Officer D. Morrison, badge 2847. We have a textbook case of what we've been looking for. Morrison felt his knees go weak. He was looking at the end of his career, possible criminal charges, and definitely the loss of his pension, all because he couldn't control his temper and his prejudices. Dr. Webb, are you safe? Captain Martinez's voice carried immediate concern. I'm fine. Officer Morrison has his hand on his weapon, but I believe he's beginning to understand the gravity of his situation. Morrison quickly removed his hand from his gun, raising both hands slightly. Sir, there was clearly a miscommunication here. I thought I observed a traffic violation. Which violation? Marcus asked pointedly. Because you've had multiple opportunities to specify, and you've failed to do so each time. The silence stretched as Morrison realized he had no answer. There had been no violation. This had been exactly what Internal Affairs suspected was happening throughout the department. Pretextual stops based on racial bias. Captain Martinez's voice cut through the tension. Officer Morrison, you are to step away from Dr. Webb's vehicle. Immediately. I'm dispatching supervision to your location. Dr. Webb, please continue recording for the record. Marcus held up his phone, showing that he had been recording the entire interaction. It's all documented, Captain. Video and audio. Morrison's face went ashen. Video evidence. There would be no way to spin this, no way to claim miscommunication or misunderstanding. His actions, his words, his threats, all captured in digital clarity. Officer Morrison, Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who held Morrison's future in his hands. I want you to think very carefully about your next actions. You're already facing potential charges for unlawful detention, intimidation, and civil rights violations. Don't make this worse for yourself. Morrison's radio crackled to life. Unit 247, respond to your status. Morrison looked at the radio, then at Marcus, then at the growing number of people who had stopped to watch the interaction. Some were already filming with their phones. This was going to be on social media within the hour. Unit 247, Morrison said into his radio, his voice barely steady, requesting supervisory response to Meridian and Oak. Traffic stop, requiring assistance. Marcus continued his phone conversation with Captain Martinez, his tone professional and measured. The subject initially refused to identify the reason for the stop, became aggressive when I questioned the legitimacy of the detention, and escalated to a threat display when I asserted my rights. Textbook intimidation tactics. Dr. Webb, this is exactly what we needed to document. How long since the initial stop? Marcus checked his watch. Approximately 8 minutes. I'm supposed to be at my daughter's school in 15 minutes, but I suspect this is going to take longer. We'll make sure she knows you were detained on official business, Captain Martinez assured him. Officer Morrison's supervisor should be arriving shortly. As if summoned by her words, a second police cruiser pulled up, and Sergeant Lisa Chin stepped out. Morrison felt a brief moment of relief. Chin was known as a fair supervisor, but that relief evaporated when he saw her expression. Sergeant Chin approached the scene with the grim look of someone who already knew what she was going to find. She had been briefed on the internal affairs investigation, and Morrison's name had come up in multiple complaints over the past year. Dr. Webb, she said with professional courtesy, I'm Sergeant Chun. I apologize for this situation. Sergeant, Marcus replied, ending his phone call. I appreciate your response. I trust this will be handled appropriately. Chun turned to Morrison, her disapproval evident. Officer Morrison, return to your vehicle and wait for further instructions. Morrison wanted to object, to explain, to somehow salvage the situation, but he could see it was hopeless. The doctor, the internal affairs consultant, stood beside. His expensive car with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. As Morrison walked back to his cruiser, Marcus called out to him. Officer Morrison. Morrison turned, hoping for some indication that this nightmare might be mitigated. You said I had no idea who I was dealing with, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the distance between them. But the truth is, you never bothered to find out who I was. You saw what you wanted to see, and you acted on your assumptions. That's exactly the problem we're here to fix. Morrison climbed into his police car and sat in stunned silence as the reality of his situation fully hit him. His career was over. His pension was gone. He might even face criminal charges. All because he couldn't see past his own biases. 2 hours later, Dr. Marcus Webb walked into the auditorium at Riverside Elementary School just as his daughter Zoe was being introduced for her science fair presentation. She spotted him immediately and broke into a wide grin. That's my dad, she announced proudly to the judges. He's a doctor who helps people. Marcus took his seat in the audience, his phone buzzing with messages from Captain Martinez, his colleagues at the hospital, and reporters who had somehow already gotten wind of the story. The video from bystanders was already going viral on social media, with the hashtag Doctor Knows His Rights trending nationwide. But for now, he focused on his daughter's presentation about the human circulatory system, her small voice confidently explaining how the heart pumps blood throughout the body. The heart has to be strong, Zoe said, looking directly at her father, because it's responsible for keeping everything else working properly. Marcus smiled, thinking about the events of the afternoon. Sometimes the heart had to be strong in ways you never expected. Sometimes standing up to injustice meant risking everything, but it also meant protecting everyone who came after you. 3 months later, Officer Dale Morrison sat in his lawyer's office, reviewing the settlement papers. That would allow him to resign from the police force without criminal charges. The civil rights lawsuit filed by Dr. Webb had been settled for an undisclosed amount, which Morrison knew meant enough money to send a message to other officers. Morrison had already started working at his brother-in-law's construction company, a job that paid half what he made as a cop, but came without the authority he had so badly abused. Dr. Marcus Webb continued his work at St. Catherine's Medical Center and his consulting role with internal affairs. The traffic stop video had become a training tool used in police academies across the country, showing the importance of treating all citizens with respect and dignity. More importantly, the incident had sparked broader reforms in the police departments. Training and accountability measures. Captain Martinez's investigation had revealed a pattern of discriminatory stops that led to policy changes and additional oversight. On the wall of his office, Marcus kept a photo from Zoe's science fair, her holding her first-place trophy, both of them smiling. Next to it was a letter from a young black medical student who had seen the traffic stop video and wrote to thank Marcus for showing him that it was possible to stand up to injustice without losing your dignity. You never know who's watching, Marcus had written back, and you never know when standing up for yourself might inspire someone else to do the same. The intersection of Meridian and Oak looked exactly the same as it had 3 months earlier. Traffic lights changed from red to green. Cars proceeded through without incident, and life continued with its normal rhythm. But for those who knew the story, it would always be remembered as the place where a doctor refused to be intimidated, where assumptions met reality, and where one man's courage to assert his rights changed how an entire police department approached its job. Officer Morrison had been right about one thing. Dr. Webb was not someone to underestimate. But he had learned that lesson far too late, and at a cost that would follow him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the most powerful response to intimidation is simply knowing who you are and refusing to pretend to be anything less.